Let's start working through our first review. Make sure you have that paper that I gave you guys in our face-to-face time. Remember, you can make any notes on that page that you want. It is a grade, so make sure every problem is completed. You can use the notes on your test. You will turn that in with your test. Make good use of the fact that I am letting you have notes. Write down the steps, put the examples down, whatever you need on that paper, put it on there so you can use it on your test. The first section on here is walking through just simple or basic, maybe not simple, that may not be the best word, but basic order of operations. Remember, your steps are parentheses first. Exponents and any square roots will go together there. Then you're going to multiply and divide together from left to right. So even if division comes first, you need to do that first. And then you're going to add and subtract together from left to right. And the reality is, all of you guys know this. The problem is, as you're working quickly and when you let yourself get a little stressed out with tests, you just sort of jump in and start working. So make sure you remember to work in order of operations. Let's do an example. I believe this is the first problem on there. I'm going to work some of the problems. You are going to work the other problems, and remember that packet is half of your grade, all right? So your first problem says 14 minus 11 squared minus 45 divided by 9. Order of operations, we're going to solve our parentheses first. Now we're going to work our exponents. So 14 minus 11 gave me 3. 3 squared is 9. And then we're going to multiply and divide together from left to right. As you're working through this, your instinct is going to be to do 9 minus 45 first. But remember, you multiply and divide first. 45 divided by 9 is 5. And then you subtract. 9 minus 5 is 4. It's going to be very important for your grading, for you to show your work. If you get a problem wrong and all you have is your answer, it's going to be worth the whole 10 points or whatever it is. If you have shown me your work and I can see that you simply made a small error, I will not count all of the points off. So as you're working these, practice showing all of your work. All right, the second part, it says evaluate algebraic expressions, which sounds kind of scary because they're strange words, but the reality is they're pretty simple. When you are evaluating, which is just a fancy word for solve it or find the value of, you're going to plug in the value and solve. So the problems will look like this: 4x plus 9 if x equals 3. You are told in this case what x is, so all you're going to do is plug that x in. You're going to replace the x in the equation with the value of x. So it's going to become 4 times 3, because we've switched the x out for its value, plus 9. Remember that that 4x means 4 times x, not 43, but 4 times 3. How do I know that? Two things side by side equals multiply. Then I just solve using order of operations. I'm going to work through this. 4 times 3 is 12, and then 12 plus 9 is 21, and that's it. Those are pretty simple. All right. C is talking about multiplying and dividing terms, and remember, a term is just a group of coefficients and variables, and it can have exponents in it as well. What you need to remember is when you're multiplying and dividing terms, the coefficients, which is the letter in front of the term, or at the beginning of the term, if you're multiplying, you multiply those coefficients. If you're dividing, you're dividing the coefficients. The operation for the big numbers doesn't change. However, when you're multiplying, remember you add exponents. When you are dividing, you subtract exponents. That's only for exponents, remember. Coefficients or the big numbers, you do what the operation tells you. So here's an example. This tells me 3c3 times 9cd squared. We're multiplying. How do I know that? Two things side by side means multiply. 3 and 9, those are the coefficients. I multiply those because that's the operation happening. 3 times 9 is 27. And then c3 and c. Do not forget the understood 1 with that c. So 3 plus 1 is 4. And then there's no other d's, so that d squared stays. So what I have in my total answer is 27c4d2. If I was dividing, then I would just subtract. That'd be 3 minus 1 instead of 3 plus 1. So multiply, add exponents, divide, subtract exponents. Let's talk about solving for an unknown. Means solving for x. It's almost always x at this level. Step 1 is to distribute. Anything that needs to be distributed in, you need to do that first. Then you're going to add or subtract any like terms so that you have it all simplified before you start moving things around. Then you're going to move your variable terms to one side. So anything that has an x, so you're going to move all of your x's to one side. We'd like x on the left. It's just the way our brains function. So if you'll move all your x's to the left, then move non-variable terms to the other side. So any variable, or any term, sorry, that does not have an x. So any numbers move to the other side. Usually we have x's on the left, regular numbers on the right. Remember, when you're moving them over the equal sign, the operation changes. Then you're going to add any like terms you have again. And some people sort of do that as they move them, which is fine. Then you're going to divide or multiply. 90% of the time you're going to divide to get x by itself. Occasionally you'll have to multiply. Let's walk through an example of this. So here's the problem that you have. 7 times x plus 5 equals 28. Step 1, distribute that 7 out. And remember, that has to go to every piece inside those parentheses. So 7 times x, 7x, 7 times 5, 35. Everything is distributed. You should, if you can at this point, add any like terms. We don't have any like terms. You have to remember 7x and 35 are not the same. They do not match. They are not like terms. You know that when we talk about it orally, but again, you're taking a test, you get stressed out, and you're working as fast as you can. Remember, you can only add like terms. So now I'm going to start moving. I need all x terms on the left. Well, I only have one x term. It's already on the left. 7x is already on the left. So now I'm going to move that 35 from the left side to the right side. When I do that, the operation changes. The plus becomes a minus. 28 minus 35 is negative 7. Watch your signs. Those of you who struggle with your negatives and positives, make sure you have your calculator. You will not be allowed to use your phone. Bring a real one and use it. If you're one who makes a lot of mistakes with negatives and positives, use it. Now I'm not finished. X is not by itself. So I need to move that 7 over. I'm multiplying it on the left. When I move it, I divide. Remember, the operation changes, the sign does not. So when I move it, I'm still dividing by a positive because the operation changes, the sign does not. Negative 7 divided by 7 is negative 1. The last step of this review is about radicals, and a radical is that square root sign. We say square root, but it can be a square root, a cubed root, a fourth root, any of those. Those are our radicals. And there's several things that we do with radicals, so let's walk through the how-to of each of these real quick. Number 1, if we're told to solve for a variable, means solve for x, the steps are, number 1, you're going to isolate the radical. We're going to work through a couple of these, so make sure you write these down, and then you can write the examples down. Isolate means get by itself. Then you're going to add any like terms. You have to make sure you add your like terms and isolate your radical first. Then you're going to square both sides. And the reason we have to square both sides is because, well, maybe I shouldn't say square. If it's a square root, we square both sides. Later, if it's a cubed root, you would cube both sides. For today, or for this lesson, we're just squaring both sides. The reason we're squaring both sides is because a square undoes a square root. So they're inverse operations, and then you just solve. Once you square both sides, the radical symbol disappears, and then you can solve. We'll do one of those in a second. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to work with fractions with radicals, and here's the rule. You cannot have a radical in the denominator. And so to isolate that or to undo it, you simply multiply the top and bottom by the radical. We'll do one of those. And then multiply, you simply whole number times whole number, radical times radical. To divide, whole number divided by whole number, radical divided by radical. And then at the very end of any of these problems, you have to simplify. And to simplify something, You break it into its prime factors. You find any pair. Each pair pulls out as 1, and then you leave the leftovers. Now, have those written down somewhere, and then we're going to work through a couple of these. So if you need to pause the video to have these written down, that's fine. Let's work through these two. Now, here's the thing. It's mathematically illegal to have a radical in your denominator. You can't do it. You can't leave it there. So in order to eliminate that radical sign or that square root sign, if I multiply a square root by itself, for example, square root of 4 times the square root of 4 is the square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4, which is 2. Radical times a radical eliminates the radical. But whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So square root of 13 times square root of 13 is just 13. On the top, I have 5 times square root of 13, and because those are different forms, it's almost like an x and a no x term, I can't combine them. 5 and square root of 13 are not in the same form, so we simply write them side by side, and that's the answer. Now on this second one, we're multiplying. Now I always look inside my parentheses, and I can't do anything with this because they are not like terms. They're not the same form, so I can't add them. So what I now have to do is distribute this. Square root of 6 times 4 is 4. Square root of 6. Square root of 6 times square root of 3 is the square root of 18. Now, if I ended up with like square root of 25, I would simplify that down to 5. In this case, there's not a square root of 6. There's not a square root of 18, but I need to simplify it. So the way I'm going to simplify it is I'm going to break it down into its prime factors. This is 2 times 9, 3 times 3. And I'm going to kind of rewrite this. And because I have square roots, I need to look for any pairs that I have. There's no pairs in this first term, so it's going to stay 4 square root of 6. Nothing matches to pull out. However, in this last one, I have a pair of 3s. Those pair of 3s are going to pull out as 1. Square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. And that leftover is going to stay in. And because my radicals don't match, this is where I have to stop. If I was dividing these, I would just divide the terms instead of multiplying, all right? So finish up the problems on this, work through the other reviews. Remember, your review packet is for half of your test grade, so get it done.